John is really, really an exciting book. So let's jump in to John. Let's study it, and hopefully I'll get through all of it because we only have about an hour and a half to get through it. If I don't get through all of this, then the first part of class will be covering John. Just for your information, it won't be on the test. Only what we've done up to the end of class today will be fair game for the test. Okay, so the Gospel of John, authorship. When we start to deal with authorship, the Gospel of John is the only one of the Gospels where you actually have any sort of claim about who the author is. It's still anonymous, meaning it doesn't give you the name of the author, but it does give you a hint. At the very end of the Gospel of John, notice throughout the Gospel of John, there's one of the apostles that is never named. They just call him the disciple whom Jesus loved. Throughout the whole book, it's the disciple whom Jesus loved. It's the disciple whom Jesus loved. And at the very end, it says, and the disciple of Jesus whom Jesus loved, this disciple is the one who wrote this account. So who's it written by? The disciple whom Jesus loved, but specifically, who is the disciple whom Jesus loved? Yeah. The disciple whom Jesus loved, there's two major possibilities. The traditional view is that it's John, the son of Zebedee. John, the son of Zebedee, is the Apostle John. Okay? The Apostle John. There is a minority view. It's an alternate tradition. There's one church father that says something that could be taken to say that it was written by another John that was really close to Jesus, an elder John. I don't subscribe to this view. This view, there's a couple things that people kind of take to support it that are closer to the epistles. The last two epistles of John, which is 2nd John and 3rd John. Some say that's the elder John, but this is written by John. I subscribe to the traditional view that Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Revelation are all written by the Apostle John.
Who's the elder John?
The elder John. So a guy named Papias is who mentions the elder John. Papias is living in the beginning of the 2nd century, and he says that there is another John known as the elder John that did ministry in the same area, and he says that he wrote some letters. So that leads people to say that the epistles of John, specifically the last two especially, were written by this 2nd John. The problem you get into is that the style of the Gospel of John, 1st John, and then the two epistles of John, the last two epistles of John, the style is very similar, which leads people to think that they were written by the same person or at least the same group of people. So that's what gets into it. To be honest, if you know the traditional view, the disciple John, the Apostle John, John the son of Zebedee, that's really the one. There are actually some other views that I'm not going to get into because, again, this isn't an advanced level class. We don't need to get into every argument that people have made about authorship. The main thing to know is it's the disciple whom Jesus loved. The internal evidence seems to indicate that it is the Apostle John. So that's why I go with the John view. The internal evidence, everywhere they say, the disciple whom Jesus loved, the disciple whom Jesus loved, the disciple whom Jesus loved, those are all places that the Synoptic Gospels say that's where the Apostle John was. So it really seems to be the Apostle John and not some other John. And then the fact that you have all these stylistic similarities with the last three epistles tells me that's why I think the epistles of John and the Gospel of John were written by the same person. Okay, so looking at date. So most likely the Gospel of John is the last of the four Gospels in terms of being written. Okay? It's most likely the last one. Remember that. That is an easy test question. It's most likely the last one. So the date range you typically get is between 60 and 90. Some people want to push John really early. The problem with pushing John as early as 60 is that John has a very sophisticated theology. You can tell these ideas are really well thought out. At the beginning, he's like, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It seems really well thought out. So that tends to make people want to push it a little bit later. The most likely is between 85 and 90 is the most likely time, but you could have a range of 60 to 90. John, another reason people would tend to say that John is written later is John is just really nothing like the Synoptics. So the Synoptics are written earlier. John doesn't seem to really use them. Some would even argue that John doesn't seem to even be aware of the Synoptics, or he seems to be, basically, they've said everything they need to say. I'm going to say something different. I want you to understand something different. So the later dating kind of fits this idea of, yes, he's aware of the Synoptics. He's aware that those three books have been written, but it's enough time has passed. He's like, I'm not trying to rehash what they've done. I'm intentionally avoiding talking about the same things. There are these stories that no one knows about, and I don't have much longer left in this world, and I need to write them down for y'all. And that's kind of consistent with the end of John. The end of John is, look, if we wrote everything down if I wrote everything down there was to know about about Jesus, then there wouldn't be enough books. But, hey, here it is. And then that last part of John, it seems to be the community around John seems to be saying, hey, he wrote these, and we're affirming that he wrote this stuff. And that is true. Any questions about that? So, an interesting thing about John is one of the most would say the last of the Gospels. A lot of liberal scholars, so when I say liberal scholar, I mean people who they question these are people who study, who academics who study the Bible, but who question the authenticity and reliability of the Bible. So, and they apply like these really critical methods to it. So, a lot of liberal scholarship, especially in the early 1900s, they looked at John as just this theological document. They looked at John as it doesn't really give real history. It doesn't really tell you about who Jesus is, and it's written so late that this person wasn't an eyewitness, and there's no way they could have been an eyewitness. Okay? Even though the early church history affirms that it was an eyewitness. But something interesting happened. I think in like the 1940s. They found a fragment of John. They found a little fragment of a piece of papyrus, which is like, papyrus is similar to paper, but it's made out of a certain plant. It's really common in Egypt. They found a piece of papyrus that is the oldest existing written piece of the New Testament. The oldest existing written piece of the New Testament, and it was John. And most would date it to 125 AD. So all those people who were trying to attack John and say, the Gospel of John was written in like the 2nd and 3rd century and 4th century, all of a sudden we find a little piece of John, little piece of it. It's only about 3-4 inches long, about 3 inches wide, and they find this little piece front and back, and it obviously it's in Greek because that's what the New Testament was written in, and they were able to match it up with John. So all these people for all these years who attacked John said, it couldn't have been an eyewitness, da-da-da. Well, if John was written around 90 AD, the way this was found in Egypt, the way things worked is it would have had to have been written down and copied and copied and copied and passed around and circulated. So probably at least 20, 30 years have passed between it being written and it being circulated, because it's so far from Ephesus, which is where John wrote it. So what you get is, so often people will try to criticize the Bible, but if you wait long enough, it'll prove itself. So you have this, the earliest fragment of the New Testament is a fragment of the Gospel of John. And it dates anywhere from 100 AD to 50 to 150 AD. Not sure. So again, if I were to ask you, what's the oldest fragment of the New Testament is of what book of the Bible? John. Yes. Okay, so any questions about dating? John is dated to about what time?
65, 85.
Between 60 and 90, right? Who does the Gospel of John say wrote it?
The disciples of Jesus loved.
Disciple who Jesus loved. What is the traditional view of the disciple whom Jesus loved? John the son of Zebedee. What is an alternate view? John the Elder. Okay, so let's look at, there's a video, the Bible Project video, that's going to kind of set us up. We're going to look at that, and then we're going to come back to this. So let me get that pulled up for us.